Standing by. The Terry and Ted podcast is sponsored by Jaguar Land Rover Laval. Get out of the big city and experience a construction zone free test drive. There is such a thing.
Look at us doing another episode of the podcast, Ted.
There's no stopping us now.
I've had a wardrobe change.
I see that, yeah. Go Vikings, Western Washington University.
Yes, sir. Pacific. Now that I'm in the Pacific Northwest,
Oh, that's true, yeah.
I'm trying to support the. Well, it's not local because it's just over.
It's local-ish.
It is, because one of the great things about living where I'm living is I'm about probably about a 12-minute drive from the border.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to, if it keeps up the way things are going, I'm going to start gassing my tank.
You know,
that
that baseball park in Seattle looks pretty nice. You might want to go down there and watch a Mariners game.
We've got that on tap, and we've already been to the Climate Pledge Arena, and let me tell you something. This is the model for all arenas to come in the future. It's stunning, beautifully designed, and it walks the walk in terms of the Climate Pledge. It's really
Is that where the Seattle Kraken play?
That's right. It's quite something. We went to see Paul McCartney there. How are you? Good?
I'm good, thank you.
Very good. Before we start, we're ignoring our guest again, which is very rude. It's something I can't get used to. When you do the podcast, you invite your guest in, and they sit over next to you, and you and I look at each other like our guest is fog, which is unbelievably rude, and it's really hard to do as a Canadian. But we'll be saying hi to Ian in just a moment. But first, as we were just at lunch. And I was just explaining to Ian that I'm being squired around in the beautiful, absolutely stunningly comfortable. Well, it's not stunningly comfortable because I knew it would be. This Jaguar that you're driving me around in is unbelievably beautiful.
The Jaguar F-Pace T25, provided by our title sponsors at Jaguar Land Rover Laval. Jaguar got into the SUV game, I guess, about, what'd you say, Poseidon? How long ago did they bring out the F-Pace? Maybe 4 years ago?
I think 2016, 17.
Okay, around that time. Mm-hmm. And they did it right. This is a beautiful vehicle. It has Jaguar luxury and performance. And the one I have, the T25, that's a nice family carrier. That's something, that you take the kids around town in, get them to soccer, get them to school. The one I like is the Jaguar F-Pace SVR, because that's got the 550 horsepower that you need.
It sounds like a NASCAR car.
It does. It really does. It has a tremendous exhaust note on it. They're beautiful vehicles, and of course Jaguar traditionally are all about luxury sedans or luxury sports coupes, and you can see those as well up at Jaguar Land Rover Laval. Jaguar.ca and JaguarLaval.ca and LandRoverLaval.ca. Go by and see them. You will be greeted probably with espresso right out of the gate. They'll give you an espresso, and you could ask for tea, I suppose, since they are British luxury vehicles. But I think Nino and Renato are probably a little handier at whipping up an espresso for you. Nice people, nice product. Go up and see them. No pressure. There's nobody's nose is in the air. There's nothing snooty about it, even though it's a luxury brand. It's a family-run business, and you'll be treated like family when you go up to see them.
Our guest today is Ian MacDonald, and I could start by introducing Ian by reading his resume, but we'd be here all day. He is widely known on the Hill, as they say, and has been involved in politics in so many years, and has just put out another book. I'm going to ask you how many in a minute, Ian. It's called Politics and Players, and as Ian and I were just discussing, it is a beautiful put-together book of his columns and comments of the last, how many years, Ian? Would you say? Last 4 years. And it's a book made for the doc. It's a great summer read, and as a matter of fact, on the back of the cover, there's a beautiful, beautiful picture, a very Canadian picture of a very Canadian scene. of a very Canadian lake, which I'm guessing is Wakefield. Is it Wakefield?
Lac St. Pierre to Wakefield.
It is. Okay.
Where the sun sets off the end of our dock.
Oh, man. What a picture. And I'm guessing that's one of your daughters.
That's Zara, who's turning 13 in 2 weeks.
And she's wrapped in the Canadian flag.
Look at that.
Standing on the dock. It doesn't get much more Canadian than that.
Her mother,
Ian,
Tasha
right?
Carradine, took that shot.
Is that right?
Last summer.
It's such a beautiful shot. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for coming to the podcast. I feel like suddenly the podcast got classy with you here.
Pleasure to be with you. Welcome home. Nice to see you, Ted.
Thank you.
Nice to
You're
see
all
you,
set
Ian.
for the Grand Prix with that Jaguar, I guess, huh?
Well, I don't know if that. Maybe if I get the 550 horsepower one, the one I got now could possibly be a pace car.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
It is a beautiful vehicle.
Can you drive a Standard?
I can. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We're old school. I
That's
can drive a
right. Yeah.
Standard, too.
Yeah. Learned on a Standard.
Can you drive 3 on a tree?
I can.
Yeah,
Yes,
me
sir.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
you don't
you?
see
Do
those
you remember
anywhere.
3 on a tree?
Yeah.
No, but I can drive a Standard.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 on a tree was when the gear shift was on the column.
Yeah.
First gear was down here.
Yeah.
Second was there, and
Yeah.
then third was down.
Yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
when you're first learning that, I'll tell you. It's
You're
really
right.
Quite something. I don't know where to start, Ian. I think I'd like to start with why you decided that it was a good time to revisit some of these topics in the book.
Well, this is my third collection of articles from the last, going back to the turn of the century. And this one is the shortest time period, from 2017 to 2021. But it's also the period in which the most has happened over a 4-year span. Everything from Donald Trump in the White House to Donald Trump leaving the White House, thank goodness, to the Trudeau years in Canada following the Harper years, to COVID-19. That's the last chapter in the book, COVID and then some, the pandemic and then some, and how that has kind of changed the way we are. It's created a new normal and a new vocabulary. Words like distancing that were never used before, except when you were driving.
That's right. Yeah, I never thought of that. Yeah.
It's a different ball game, a different world today, and in 4 years, the transformation of society has been just for example, working from home.
Yeah.
You used to say, "I work from home." It was kind of a brag.
Yeah.
Now it's everybody works from home.
Right.
And it's a drag.
Well, as a columnist, I guess it was unique, right? You could bang out a column at the cottage or at home when you were in the newspaper game, right?
Yeah, and now it has created the world of the Zoomcast.
Yeah,
where people work harder than ever because after the Zoom meeting they have to go and write a memo on it.
Right, right, and it's people are doing customer service from their living rooms.
That's
for major companies.
Is it a change for the better, Ian, or for the worse?
Ask us
Or
in
is it
10
that
years.
simple? Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
That's a good
good answer.
You fellows are broadcasters, so your work is behind microphones, and it doesn't matter really where the microphones are. So it's not that transformational for you, except if you were sitting at home with 4 kids, as many career women have been doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it.
Yeah, I will say this though: when we're sitting across the table from each other, when we're in the same studio, we do a better show than when he's in Vancouver and I'm in Montreal.
Sure.
Yeah.
We're still great though,
Oh, terrific!
even on the Zoom. One of the things that struck me, Ian, like I told you, the book didn't arrive in time before my departure from the Fraser Valley, but I the other night I got in about 55 pages in. And one of the things that struck me is there is and I don't know if this is deliberate because column after column, there is a lot of reference to decency and the decency of politics that existed at a time when you were in it. And I'm curious to get your take on what's happened to that and how our politics up here have become, I think, poisoned to the point where people are throwing pebbles at the Prime Minister or chasing Jagmeet Singh out of a riding by yelling at him and confronting him and screaming him. Those are things when I see them that, pardon me for being trite, but it's not very Canadian.
Largely the negative influence of social media is a big part of it. And part of it is the increased influence of pressure groups like the convoys that invaded Ottawa and shut down a city of 1 million people, shut down a G7 capital for 3 weeks last winter. There is some of the decency and courtesy that used to be part of public life is missing. And I'll give you one example that I lived through myself. In the free trade election of 1988, the most consequential campaign of the modern era, Mr. Turner, John Turner, the Liberal leader, had one point of view that was very clear. He was anti-free trade, and he said to, and won the debate against Mr. Mulroney, that famous night where he said, "I believe you have sold us out." That it was a question of sovereignty that we were selling to the Americans, not just goods. And in spite of that, he actually was doing Mulroney a favor, woke him up, and then he ran a spectacular campaign for the rest of that October, November of 1988. But when it was over, and Turner stepped down as Liberal leader, Mulroney offered to make him ambassador to the Vatican and Rome. And Turner had to decline because he, as he said, he had to go back and earn some money in the private sector, right? Because he was kind of broke from his years in politics.
And there was a decency in that offer, not just because John Turner was his appointment, but he had an appreciation and an understanding for John Turner as a practicing Catholic.
Yes,
that's a very human and decent thing to do.
It's interesting you say that because Turner was the chair of the Cardinals' dinner every year in Toronto. And one year he asked Mulroney to go as the keynote speaker. That was a big event they had at the Royal York, and he accepted, changed his schedule to do it because Turner was the chair of the dinner. And they were friends, through thick and thin. Opponents, but friends.
Right.
Adversaries, but contemporaries
right.
At the same time. And Turner, for example, had supported Mulroney on the Meech Lake Accord, which wasn't easy for him in the Liberal Party because Mr. Trudeau Sr. had opposed it quite strenuously. And Mulroney appreciated that. That was the kind of rule of courtesy in the House of Commons that you still see to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some of it is missing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious to get your take because you work so close with Mr. Mulroney, and Mr. Mulroney's, part of his reputation, and I remember this when he was Prime Minister and when he ran, people would say to him, if you met him one-on-one, he made you feel like $1 million and you were the only person in the room. He had a bigger difficulty with crowds, and he had quite a tough reputation coming out of office. Has that reputation been rehabilitated, for lack of a better word?
It's interesting you say that because the other night at our Montreal book launch at the McGill Faculty Club, he came.
Yes.
Not a large turnout. And he talked to everyone there.
Mm-hmm.
They all wanted selfies with him.
Of course.
He obliged happily, and everyone in the room got a picture with him. And then he left. Mm-hmm. But he was delighted to have done so.
I think he was one of our better prime ministers in the history of prime ministers. Like I said, I've had a chance to meet him on a couple of occasions.
Well, he was a great campaigner, first of all.
He was a great campaigner for sure.
People that asked me what it was like working for him as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to say it was like being up on Secretariat in the Belmont. You just let him run and win by 31 legs.
So for people who aren't seasoned in politics, what makes a great campaigner?
The ability to create sound bites rather than and memorable to turn confrontations in their favor.
You had a choice?
For example, yes, Mr. Turner, you had an option.
Option, yeah. You had an option.
You could have done better. That was the turning point of the 1984 campaign. In 88, I remember one day we were in Vancouver or Victoria, I forget which, and these demonstrators, hecklers who had been following us from the NDP, were interrupting the meeting, and finally Mulroney turned to them and said, if you let me finish my speech, I'll talk to you afterwards. So he gave them a debate, and the the journalists who were traveling with him went crazy because it was totally spontaneous.
Right.
It wasn't rehearsed.
And how was his tone when he said that? Was it a conciliatory?
Conciliatory, civilized.
Not like Ronald Reagan's, shut up.
No, he wasn't patronizing at all, and he knew his stuff. In fact, when he was challenged for this, I was sitting on the bus writing the speech for the next event, and the press secretary, Mark Lorty, got on the bus, and he said, "Have we got a copy of the free trade agreement?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He says, "Well, the PM's about to have a debate with these hecklers about it." And I said, "Does he know it that well?" And Mark said, "We're about to find out." And it turned out that he did.
How do you approach that, Ian? For people who don't know, you're on the bus and you're writing a speech for the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister say to you, "I want to make these 5 points. Give me a copy when we get to Baie-Comeau or wherever"? And how do you approach it? Are you thinking about Mr. Mulroney's voice? Are you thinking about what it is he's trying to say? How do you go about composing a speech for somebody else?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, Terry. One day in the 88 campaign, we were on the bus heading from Quebec City to Baie-Comeau, his hometown on the North Shore. And he came to me in the front of the bus and he said, "I'd like this to be personal." And I went, "Oh, there's no pressure." And then just before the ferry crossing the Saguenay River, the motorcycle gang, what are they called? The famous motorcycle gang.
There's the Hells Angels.
Hells Angels.
Yeah.
A bunch of them, a delegation of them got on the ferry. They didn't know we were on the ferry.
Right.
They found out who it was, and so they gave us an escort all the way up the North Shore to Baie-Comeau. And then wished him luck.
Did that make the papers or the media in any way?
I think it did, yeah.
That's a hell of a story.
Yeah.
And what happens? You finish the speech and give it to him, and then he says, does he hand it to you? Do you get a copy back with a bunch of lines through
Well,
it?
he talked about his father that day.
Oh, but did he really? Wow.
And being the electrician's son and becoming being Prime Minister of Canada. And those are words that are today engraved in stone at the Mulroney Center at St. Francis Xavier University.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So
that was a good night.
Yeah. It means the world to him, eh?
It was what he wanted to say.
Yeah.
And I knew it. It was was one of those horse and jockey moments. Yeah.
What is that like as a speechwriter to have that engraved in stone?
Well, it's something that will live after you.
Yeah. That's pretty powerful.
It will always be there. And something that's for posterity. Yes.
One of the things you talk about in the book is making notes with the Queen.
Yes.
and given where we're at with as we record this, the Queen is just celebrating her platinum jubilee. Have I got that right?
I believe so. Yeah, 70th anniversary.
Ted and I were talking about, we both love the Queen. We absolutely adore the Queen, and she's getting more adorable. The thing she did with James Bond, the thing she's
Paddington
done
Bear.
with Paddington Bear. It's really, really quite something.
Pulling the toast out of her purse.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, just unbelievable.
I've told Terry, and let me just interrupt for a second, Terry, to tell this story. Many years ago, 40 years ago, in fact, I believe it was the summer of '82 that Charles and Diana were on the Britannia, the royal yacht, and came to Halifax. And a friend and I were down in Halifax on vacation, and we were drinking in a tavern down there, or a bar or whatever, and some of the Britannia crew members were there, and we got to chatting with them, and they observed to us that the Queen they said she's just a lovely woman who likes to cut a rug and have a drink and tell a joke. They said she was just as lovely as she could be.
There's a terrific story that appeared also this week on Twitter. I don't know who the gentleman was, but obviously he worked with the Queen and talked about the time that they came upon. I don't even know how this happened.
I think they were out they might have been at Balmoral Castle.
Yes,
they were out in the
hills.
countryside somewhere, and it was an American tourist
who did not recognize the Queen and asked her where she lived, and she said, "I live in London, but I have a country home right over the hill." It's just a terrific story.
Yeah.
And he also said that she's got quite a sense of humor.
Yeah.
And I want to ask Ian, are you intimidated when you're in the room with Her Majesty? And what do you say to her, and how do you offer her notes?
Well, as you know, wherever the Queen is, whether it's in London or in the Commonwealth, her speeches are known as, you give them advice. The Prime Minister's office, wherever they are, the President's office, gives the Queen and her office advice, drafts, and work from there. And she has the ability of making her own, adding value-added comments to it, and deciding when to personalize a speech and when not to. For example, once I added, because it was her style, I added my husband and I to one of her speeches, and she took it out. Basically, it was her way of saying, I'm the one who decides to say when I say my husband and I.
That's interesting.
In a very nice way.
Yeah.
But she, for example, during the Mulroney years when I held the pen for the Queen and Queen's office, they were very good to deal with, very professional at all times. She had a way of personalizing. If you gave her a speech that was just a process speech that said, "I now declare this bridge open," she would get through it. But if it was a more meaningful event, she would find a way of personalizing it. For example, in 1990, she came to Ottawa to Parliament Hill for Canada Day on what was meant to have been the day that she proclaimed the Meech Lake Accord, which had died a week earlier because it hadn't been ratified by all 10 provinces. And so she added to the text, all on her own. She said, "I am not just a fair weather friend. I'm glad to be here at this sensitive time." And then she went on and said to say, "Knowing Canadians as I do, I cannot believe that they will not be able, after a period of calm reflection, to find a way through present difficulties." Because there was, as you know, brewing crisis between Quebec and the rest of Canada over the death of Meech. It was a linguistic and cultural divide. And the first time I heard that was when she said it. And she had written it in herself in her handwritten notes.
Wow.
And the only person who was aware of it was the Prime Minister, whom she read it to for his sign-off at a breakfast or a early lunch for the Canada Day event, a breakfast at 24 Sussex. So we were hearing it for the first time, and so were the British press who were traveling with her, who told us they had never heard her make such a political speech, and she got a huge ovation for those comments.
She knows how to read a room.
Yeah. Or read a room and
Read a country.
read a country.
Yeah.
And for example, to give another example, in 1992, on Canada Day, the 125th anniversary of Canada 125, we had written a speech for her. It was signed off by her in her office and everything. And she was at a lunch before with Mr. Mulroney at 24 Sussex, before they went up to the Hill for the Canada Day celebration at noon. She said to him, "Prime Minister, we really should say a word about your peace. Say something about your peacekeepers in former Yugoslavia." And once again, the first time we were hearing it was when she said it. And I said to a colleague, "Why didn't we think of that?" And and again, it got a huge ovation. It was the biggest applause line in her speech. To give a more recent example, her famous speech to Britain and the world from Windsor Castle at the start of the pandemic. And when she concluded the lines her own lines, that we will be with friends again, we will be with our families again, we will meet again. And then kind of cue the music of Vera Lynn from the Second World War.
Right.
We'll meet again some sunny day.
Wow.
And again, that was the moment where she owned the whole world.
Yeah.
Oh, this woman is, she's formidable.
Yeah.
Classy lady.
What is it like to be in her presence? And do you, I'm not being flip, but my presentation will be. Is there a moment where you're thinking, Jesus Christ, it's the Queen?
No. She invites you to sort of be yourself.
Okay.
She's disarming.
Yes, and she has so much stature and grace of her own that she doesn't need to be told that she's the queen. She knows that.
Yes.
She's kind of had this job for 70 years and started out as a mechanic in the Second World War. So she knows how to drive your Jaguar.
Yeah.
There you go. She seems to have weathered the loss of her lifelong husband and partner,
Prince Philip.
Yeah,
Yes.
nicely is the wrong word, but she's
handled it with grace and dignity
and yes, I mean, quite often when couples are together that long and one of them passes at that age, the other one is not too long for this world.
He was 99.
Yeah, the other one is often not too long for this world because they just can't live without each other.
He
but
was
on
very
she
quotable,
goes.
sometimes in a way that the Royals.
He was terrific. He was a real character.
Really, we're not really happy about. But
and I don't know, and I can only tell you from a distance and from a perspective, I know nothing about the inside workings of the royal family or their relationship, but the two of them struck me as a great love story.
I think they must have been, yeah.
How else do you last that long as a couple if you're not, eh?
The adventures of their children and grandchildren are different storylines.
Certainly they are, yeah.
Have been followed more by the tabloids, unfortunately, especially the British tabs over the years, but there you go.
I want to talk more about that, and just going to take a moment to thank one of our sponsors, but I want to talk more about the surroundings of power with Ian MacDonald, who is our special guest today. Just released a book called Politics and Players. Great summer read. My friends at Matelas Bonheur are proud sponsors of the podcast. They have been, I've been speaking for them for a number of years now, watching that family-run company grow. It's a company that's born and raised here in Quebec. It's been developed here in Quebec. Has a number of locations all over the greater Montreal area, and I highly recommend an in-store visit because you're going to meet some nice people who are going to be very helpful, talk to you about sleep technology. Yes, such a thing does exist, and whether or not you want to do it in person or online, Matelas Bonheur, as sponsors of the Standing By podcast, are offering up a 5% discount in-store or online for products that are regularly priced or on sale. It'll give you 5% off whatever you're buying if you use the code TER05 or TED05. That's TER05 or TED05. It will take 5% off whatever your bill may be, online or in person. If you're looking for change in linens, change in mattresses, and it's time for a better night's sleep, Matelas Bonheur is where you want to go. It's matelasbonheur.ca. Ian, when you're in those, I don't know if it's just me that I get, I have these lump in my throat moments when I find myself in circumstances that I never thought I would be in. And it's happened to me a number of times. I guess it's going to sound like I'm dropping names and telling stories, but I was invited to the Mulroney residence one year for a spring party, and I was standing by the pool trying to catch some air and trying to gather myself because I was surrounded by company that at the time I didn't think I belonged in. Sarah Savard, Ted Blackman, senators, the mayor of Montreal, et cetera, et cetera. And I was standing by the pool catching some air, and I heard that baritone voice from behind me saying, "Terry." And it was Mr. Mulroney, and he was still the prime minister, and I was standing by the pool talking to the prime minister of the country at his residence, and I couldn't help myself. I got a little bit emotional thinking, I don't know how this kid from Verdun got here, standing next to the prime minister of the country and turning in this circle of people of power, but there's I get overwhelmed sometime by those lucky moments, or however you want to describe them, and I will remember them always. And I wasn't at the seat of power like you were. I wasn't working in the PMO. I didn't sit with cabinet members or walk the halls of Parliament Hill. Did you ever stop and think, Jesus, I'm part of history?
Every day I walked into the office of what was then the Langevin building on the corner at 80 Wellington Street, directly across from Parliament Hill. and looked out my window, for example, this time of year, and saw the changing of the guard happening across the street, I said to myself, I'm so lucky and privileged to be coming here to work every day. It was an honor and privilege to serve any prime minister, and I was honored to serve mine. That's my outlook on it.
So you never became jaded?
No.
Did you see that happen to others?
In a few cases, and there were some lifestyle issues with some members of the office who, in those days, most of whom have since quit drinking, but still have high lifetime batting averages, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah.
But by and large, people have the same attitude that, and it's a very bipartisan outlook. When you meet people who've worked for Liberal prime ministers, as well as mine, who was a progressive conservative, you have something in common. Worked at the seat of power, and it's a privilege.
One of the things that I got from partway into the book was, you may have worked for a conservative prime minister, but you have an equal amount of respect for the people across the aisle, and I don't know if you are a conservative or a liberal, and I think it seems to me that you are more interested in the betterment of the country. Have I got that right?
Well, I think most people in public life go into that for that reason, from their own perspective and how they see it. Members of mainstream parties, as opposed to the fringe that is becoming, voices that are becoming, I think, too prominent thanks to social media. I worry about that.
Where is that going?
I don't know.
Do you think a moderate voice like Jean Charest, who is a man I have a great deal of respect for, and think that's where if I was running the party, that's where I would want it to go?
Well, if the Conservatives want to be a centrist party and want to have some hopes of winning the next election, Charest will be the winner of their leadership. Country is not going to vote for someone who's against vaccination mandates, who is a fan of cryptocurrencies and against central banks, and thinks that the World Economic Forum is a bunch of unelected elites when they connect Canada as a middle power to the rest of the world.
But it looks like it's going that way, doesn't it, Ian?
Well, based on the raw numbers, yes, Poilievre would be the front runner at this point. But when the two parties, the Reform Party and the former Progressive Conservatives, merged into the reunified Conservative Party in 2003, Peter MacKay, who was then the leader of the Conservatives, got a concession from Stephen Harper that was central to MacKay's own legacy and to where the party is, which is to say all ridings are created equal. So that Poilievre might have 4,000 people in a meeting in Calgary Centre. That's one riding, whereas and only 100 votes in this convention, whereas Chicoutimi-Lac-Saint-Jean, or whatever the ridings in that part of Quebec are, might have 100 members, but they also have 100 votes. So there's it's a weighted vote, and if Poilievre doesn't have...
I didn't know this.
And if you've been watching these debates, you could say what you want about the second Conservative debate, which they conducted as a quiz show rather than a debate. That's another story. But Poilievre doesn't seem to be making any friends. So my sense is, if he's not in the mid-40s on the first ballot, and on this preferential ballot, he will not grow to 50%. And that Charest will win on the second or third ballot.
Wow, interesting. It's the first time I've heard that.
You mentioned social media. Do you think social media is driving political polarization or exacerbating a polarization that already existed?
I think in driving it in Canada and the former, but the latter in the United States.
Okay.
on everything from the abortion debate to the latest gun debate. Imagine they have these, serial tragedies in schools and churches and mass shootings, and the U.S. Congress is unable to, the Senate is unable to get a majority of 60 people to pass gun control. And how here's Mr. Trudeau very opportunistically trying to capitalize on that, creating a wedge issue with the Conservatives, to which he may be successful up to a point.
I read your column about it's an interesting, I didn't even think about it this way. Ontario has always been kind of like a counterweight to the Prime Minister. And I never even thought about this when, the Liberals had the control of the power levers in Ottawa. It was William Davis in Ontario. And now it's with the left seeming to be in control in Ottawa. Now it's Doug Ford who seems to be countering. Is that a Canadian historical thing, or is it just happenstance?
That was my column in Policy Magazine website, of which I'm the editor.
Yeah, I read it last night.
And we don't, as you know, we don't have a constitutional system of checks and balances in our Constitution the way the Americans do. But we do have checks and balances at the ballot box, so that what I call nowadays blue at Queen's Park, red in Ottawa, or the reverse,
right?
Blue in Ottawa, red at Queen's Park. So, and it goes back a century, to the 1940s, almost a century, 80 years to the 1940s, when the Big Blue Dynasty was created in Ontario. By a succession by George Drew and his successors, including, and ruled for 42 years. John Robarts in the 1960s, when Ted and I were younger.
That's right, young fellas.
Bill Davis in the 1970s up till 1985. The Liberals from Mackenzie King to the beloved Louis Saint Laurent to the 4 terms of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. When they were over, and Mulroney won and Trudeau and Davis were very good partners on the economy and Constitution. As when the tide finally turned, and we had a change election federally in 1984, was followed, and Mulroney and became blue in Ottawa. Then they had a change election in Ontario, and David Peterson became premier, and it became red at Queen's Park.
Yeah, what is that?
And
is it the people doing the checks and balances?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, they built them into the ballot box.
Wow.
And here today we have Doug Ford, who has learned from his mistakes early on as Premier of Ontario and has become pals with Trudeau, and particularly with Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister. And they've worked together on cross-border issues, on pandemic issues, and they're partners, and that's what the public wants. And Ford won the debate. The only thing that mattered in that election, it was low participation, 43%.
Yeah,
because it was crazy. Because it was not a change election; it was a continuity election.
Yeah,
and the only meaningful debate event was the debate, which Ford won in a single soundbite when Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader, who has zero charisma, was accusing him of mismanaging the pandemic, and Ford said, "Well, we've made our share of mistakes, and it's all on me." And then in that moment, he won the election because he was humble and authentic.
Canadians love that,
and Canadians like that.
Canadians love that; they really do. We're talking with Ian MacDonald, and I want to take a break, Ted, and talk about our friend Sean, who, speaking of doing things for the greater good. We had lunch with Sean today, and I was quite taken with. He's a new sponsor. The name of the company is
Vozwin.
Yeah, and Vozwin and Sean, who's got an engineering background, will take an idea that you have or are working on or struggling with or whatever, and help you bring it to market. And one of the things that I was quite taken with was how much we talked about social responsibility and trying to do things for the greater good. Sean has already had 2 or 3 successful companies on his own, has held positions of power in big companies, and now is running Vozwin so he can help other people.
And he helps you through engineering and engineering consulting, industrial engineering and design, electrical engineering and design, mechanical engineering and design, software development. If you have an idea, if you are an inventor or an innovator and you have an idea that you just need to know, how do I perfect this? How do I take it to market? Sean's the guy to go to. And he will take you through that process. Or if he doesn't think you've got the right idea, or if he doesn't think it's an idea that he can take through the process, he'll send you off to somebody.
He'll throw you out.
Yeah, well, he'll throw you out and say, here's who you should go talk to.
Yeah.
But as Terry said, the most impressive thing about the time we spent with Sean today was I thought to myself, okay, I'm perfectly comfortable with sending people to this guy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a good, honest, decent guy who is interested not just in running a successful company and making a living, but in the greater good,
yes.
as you mentioned, and in innovation and in invention. Is just a fascinating guy.
And he chose us 2 knuckleheads.
Yeah, really, eh?
to carry his message.
Yeah. Well, maybe he knew we were going to have Ian MacDonald on, and we would be having some serious conversations, so some serious people would be listening and watching. Check out Sean's company, Vozwin, Vozwin.com.
Ian, what do you attribute such a low turnout in the Ontario election to, and should we have mandatory voting in the country?
Yeah, well, it was a continuity election, not a throw the bums out election. It was not a change.
Are those the
Does
only
that mean
2
everyone knew the Conservatives were going to win when you say continuity?
Well, certainly they were ahead by 10 to 12 points in the public opinion polls, and they were.
So it was the old, it doesn't matter if I vote or not, he's going to win.
Territory.
Yeah.
You could institute mandatory voting the way the Australians did nearly a century ago, but in a way, when people don't vote, that's their way of not voting. It's their way of saying they're not interested.
Yeah.
So, on the other hand, one of the interesting consequences of that, or turnouts and results of that election, was the Liberals and the NDP got exactly the same number of votes. Excuse me, 26.7%. But the NDP won 4 times as many seats as the Liberals did, 31-8.
Wow.
Yet you don't hear the NDP calling for electoral reform, do you?
No.
No, you don't. They're now the silent advocates of the first past the post system.
That's right.
They're not.
Yeah.
They're not no longer advocating mixed proportional representation,
Right.
MMP,
Right.
which is the successful German model.
Right.
So, no, first past the post is working very well for the NDP, even though they lost 10 seats.
Well, I think the current Prime Minister was once an advocate of that, and that's fallen off the table also, I think.
Yeah, the electoral reform fell off his table very early on.
Yeah, very early on.
Yeah.
In your opinion, and this is a very difficult question, and I'll understand if you throw it back at me, who's been the most consequential political figure in Canada in your lifetime?
You mean the best prime minister?
I don't know if it's the best prime minister. When I think of the different things that came across prime minister's desk, whether it was governing the country during a depression, during World War II, governing the country, as the Americans fought in Vietnam, I just think of
I would say
free trade. The National Energy Program. There's been a lot of things that have had a lot of effects on the country.
I would say 3 prime ministers. Saint Laurent, who after World War II gave us the golden age of the post-war era of unprecedented prosperity, and built NORAD, Canada's membership in NORAD, NATO, as a founding member of NATO, built the St. Lawrence Seaway over the objections of the Americans.
Wow.
Basically, he told Harry Truman, well, we'll build the seaway on our side of the Great Lakes. And the Americans went crazy. and finally they came on board.
What didn't they like about the Seaway?
Well, they thought it was a territorial invasion of, Europeans, boats and so
Right.
forth. And so we the Seaway wasn't opened by the Queen in 1959 when she sailed the Royal Yacht Britannia down the St. Lawrence River to Montreal and opened here in Montreal. That was a major achievement. Saint Laurent built the Trans-Canada Highway system in partnership with the provinces at the same time as the Americans were building the interstate highway system, as Truman and Eisenhower were doing that. And that gave us the road network and the commerce and the tourism that we still enjoy to this day. Those roadways are now being repaired and replaced, but that's one, Saint Laurent.
Yeah.
Two, I would say Mr. Pearson, because for the 5 years he was in office, again during our youth, Ted, from 63 to 68, he had a minority government, but he had the wisdom to have a partnership with the NDP, Tommy Douglas. That partnership gave us the Canadian flag, healthcare, universal health care, with a mixed jurisdiction with the provinces, and on and on. Progressive reforms of the Pearson era were remarkable. And I would say Mr. Mulroney would be the third prime minister of the modern era because of the free trade agreement and other reforms on the environment, particularly territorial sovereignty with the Americans, acid rain.
I forgot about acid rain.
When Ronald Reagan first came to Parliament Hill in 1981, there were 50,000 people on Parliament Hill shouting, "Stop acid rain." Today, it's no longer a problem. It was solved by President Bush and Mr. Mulroney. And Mulroney got Reagan to put acid rain into his speech on Parliament Hill in 1987. And Bush used to once famously said after lunch at 24 Sussex, "I got an earful on acid rain." Did he ever? And he was the author of what we call the Acid Rain Accord, and the Americans called it the something else, something other act. I forget.
What transpires? How does it get to the point? Who organizes? I'm having trouble organizing this question.
Spit it out, man.
How does the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada end up singing Irish songs on a wall during a presidential visit? Is that planned? Does somebody say, "Hey, you know what we should do tonight is sing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling," or whatever it was they sang? How does that happen, Ian?
Well, that was planned.
I figured it was, but I don't know how this
there was
comes
the
to pass.
famous contralto, Maureen, I forget her name now, who was singing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling.
Right.
And Mulroney's head deputy chief of staff, Lee Richardson, had said to Mr. Reagan, "Mr. President, just follow me down, and we'll join the chorus." And so they both sang When Irish Eyes Are Smiling on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, grapes.
A lot of people found it corny.
Yeah, it's memorable.
But
I thought it was memorable.
As Mr. Mulroney said, what's wrong with a couple of Irishmen singing When Irish Eyes Are Smiling on St. Patrick's Day? He had a point.
Yeah. Who invites Mr. Mulroney to give a eulogy of an American president? That, to me, I've found that incredibly moving. Is that a diplomatic thing or is that a family thing?
Well, first of all, Mulroney was the first and only foreign leader ever to speak at the state funeral of an American president, and he spoke at two.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan's in 2004 at the invitation of Nancy Reagan.
Okay.
And George Bush's in 2018 at the invitation of George Bush. And at first, Mulroney had said to him, this came up at a summer visit to the Bush's summer residence in Maine on the beach there. And Mulroney said, "George, I don't want to talk about this." And Bush said, "We have to, because I need to tell the people who will be organizing my funeral who I wanted to speak."
Wow.
So Mulroney had no choice but to accept. And his speech afterwards, Hillary Clinton went up to him and said, "That was wonderful. Bill would like to have a copy of it." So
Wow.
that would give you an idea of the power of those words. And they were all his own.
Yeah. And they were incredibly moving. And
Both speeches.
there was, both of them were incredibly moving. And also, I think it says something about his humanity, I guess, that in what was sometimes an adversarial relationship with the leader of the free world, they became such good friends.
Well, Mulroney used to say, the door to the Oval Office opens all the other doors in Washington and around the world, because other leaders of other countries, especially for Canada as a middle power, they know that if you have the ear of the American president, that makes you a consequential actor on the global stage. And that was the case then. I think it is proving to be the case now. Mr. Trudeau is now the ranking, Mr. Trudeau Jr., if I could put it that way, or the second Mr. Trudeau is now the ranking member of the G7, which is meeting this week in California. You'll have some words with President Biden, who is sort of besieged the poor man. Here he's with a 25% approval rating, 30%. 75% of Americans think things are going badly, and there's this supply management crisis. Gasoline is $5 a gallon. It's $2 a liter here, and $2.24 in Montreal today.
$2.33 in Vancouver.
It's okay. I've converted my car to run on baby formula.
Right. Well, that's another thing. Another part of the supply management crisis, all aggravated by Ukraine and the Russians, the behavior of Putin. It's a difficult time for President Biden. He's got his midterm elections coming up, and he's going to take what Barack Obama once called a shellacking in the midterm.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if Mr. Biden will take advice from the Prime Minister, or does the Prime Minister still seem like a kid to him?
or will he seek a second term at the age of 80?
Yeah,
That's another
these
question.
are other great questions. Yeah. We're talking to Ian MacDonald. The new book is called Politics and Players, and I'm going to take a moment to remind you about the UPS stores. Our friend David Drucker is, I called him the chief cook and bottle washer. I don't think he would appreciate that.
Probably not, but
Yeah.
David's got a pretty good sense of humor.
He does.
And he's an old friend.
Yeah, he's an old friend of ours and a supporter of the podcast. And David is supporting the podcast. And I said to him, how do you want me to tell people about the UPS stores? And he said, just do what you do. And I tell the story of entrepreneurs who run these UPS stores can deal with you if you're an entrepreneur. If you have, a lot of people run small businesses from their homes and are looking for packaging, or looking for packing, or looking for shipping solutions, or looking for, places to send a fax. Yes, people still do that. Labeling, all of the services that you can imagine you might need if you run a business, or if it's maple syrup that you want to send across the country to your friends in British Columbia. Now that I live in British Columbia, we're often recipients of packages of maple syrup.
You are not. You're making that up.
No, I'm not, because my wife loves maple syrup.
Really?
And it has to be maple syrup from Quebec. And you can't find it out there. I don't know if that's a supply chain thing, or, but
Boy, you want to make sure that's shipped properly.
you're bloody right, and that's where it goes, through the UPS stores. There are hundreds of locations. I think it's over 350 locations across the country. They're all independently run, so you're dealing with somebody in your community who will look after your business because they're running their business. If you want to find out more about it, just drop in where you see that beautiful big brown sign that says UPS store, or you could visit them online
At the upsstore.ca. Let me put you on the spot, Ian. Caroline Mulroney is a politician. I know nothing about her or her political career, but I'd be curious to know your take on whether how much has the apple, or how close has the apple fallen to the tree there? Is she a politician with a future, or has that train left the station already?
She has her mother's looks and grace and her father's political instincts.
Well, that's not bad. Yeah. That's not bad.
and she
Pretty
won
good
her
combination.
riding by a wide margin.
She won her riding with 61% of the vote, 4 times as many votes as her nearest opponent. And she's the transport minister, which is a controversial portfolio in Ontario. She's the one who's building this Highway 413. And
Has she taken a run at the leadership already?
Yes,
She has?
She ran against Ford and
That's
lost.
what I thought. Okay. So will there be another opportunity, do you think, for her?
Well, that will depend on when Mr. Ford steps down. If he leaves after 2 terms, by then Caroline would be 51. She's got 4 children, most of whom are still in school, and one of her sons is a major hockey star, plays for the Toronto Marlies.
Wow.
And is a major NHL prospect. She likes her life in Toronto.
So it might not be something she wants necessarily.
Well, I think she would prefer to run if the leadership was available in 2026 after the federal election. She would be more inclined to run provincially than federally. If more inclined to run for the Ontario leadership because she lives nearby. She lives in Forest Hill, about 3 minutes drive from Queen's Park.
Wow.
And if you're going to Ottawa as Conservative leader in opposition, say that they're looking for a leader between now and then, she would have to kind of give up her lifestyle to go and get on a plane and sit at Pearson and places like that.
What's interesting to me is the sons and daughters
question,
of these.
though, Ted.
Yeah, the sons and daughters of these politicians. The current prime minister being one of them, and Caroline Mulroney being another, got to see up close what kind of price you have to pay to serve in public office.
Well, they both grew up at 24 Sussex, so they know something about that. Yeah,
and still decided to pursue it.
yeah.
It's interesting to me. Is there something that hasn't been in a book, Ian, that you would like to share? One of the craziest things that's maybe happened, either on Parliament Hill or off Parliament Hill, that kind of made your eyes bug out of your head and your chin sway?
I'd have to think about that, Terry.
Okay, all right.
I don't know.
Okay.
You got me.
Are you being diplomatic or?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure you've seen some crazy things and some wild arguments. And
I was just thinking something. I was going to tell you something about you.
Okay.
You're a bit of a living legend in the radio business.
God.
I was telling a friend of mine named Deborah Endiger, who's in her early 50s, and she works for Elizabeth May in Ottawa, but grew up in Montreal. And she was a teenager, about 16 or 17, when you were doing the morning show at Shome. And she said, "Oh, Terry DiMonte, he used to have this traffic check thing or time check thing where he'd say, 'It's 7:47. That's the time, not an airplane.'" And I said, "How do you remember
How do you
that?"
know that?
I said, "How do you know that and remember that?" She said, "That's what I remember about Terry's morning show."
Well, that's one of Terry's trademark things.
that's really
not
something.
an airplane, just the time. Yeah.
That's really quite something that she remembers that. Here's a question for you. Why did you stay in Montreal?
Well, I came back to Montreal because it's home.
Okay.
I lived in Ottawa for 7 or 8 years. Lived in Washington for 4 or 5 years. And when I came back to Montreal, it was Lee Hamilton who had offered me the job after the 1995 referendum as the morning man at CKGM, then on Green Avenue, across the hall from you at Shome. And that's where we met and occasionally had breakfast after our shifts.
Yeah.
And
we've crossed paths many times. You were my political commentator when I was on CJAD.
And then I kind of there was a place where I lived around the corner and still do from the radio station. So I didn't have to drive in from the West Island to get up at 3 a.m. I could get up at the show was 6 to 10, so I could get up at 5:45 and just fall across the street.
Nice.
I will always be grateful to you because when I followed George Balkan, I don't know if you remember this, but when I
That was a
followed
tough act to follow, my friend.
in my biggest professional challenge ever, following that act, I was going to say filling those shoes, but you don't fill those shoes. As George said to me, you just put your shoes next to mine. I guess it was probably I don't know, maybe a couple of weeks after you were doing Friday morning commentary, political commentary. And about 2-3 weeks in, you said to me, and people were very critical of me because I was known as the rock and roll disc jockey kid who had stumbled and fallen into this job. and you said to me after we had been on the air, you do your homework and you know your stuff. Good for you. And it put air under my wings, and I will always be grateful to you for that.
And George Balkan was a legend.
He was a legend, and was very kind to me, and also put air in my wings. He spent a lot of time with me passing the baton, and it was one of my greatest challenges, but one of my greatest joys in the career.
Sure.
What's the matter, Ted? You look like you're going to cry.
No, I'm not going to cry. I was just thinking about, good God, now we have to drive home in rush hour traffic, don't we? And how can I use that to segue into a Merson Automotive commercial?
Okay. Is it time to say hi to the Mersons?
I think we should say hi to the Mersons. Merson Automotive on Saint Jacques near Cavendish in NDG. We have been speaking on their behalf, Terry and I have, for about 25 years now. They're longtime supporters of us in our various and sundry radio incarnations, and now they've come on board as sponsors of the podcast, and we are grateful to them for that. Merson is a family that's they've been in business as a all-service, full-service garage for 4 generations now, going on 4 generations.
Yes, sir. 3
generations with the 4th in the wings. And what we've always found interesting and gratifying about speaking on their behalf is that generations of customers have been coming to them. If your grandfather took his car to Ben Merson, your dad probably took his car to Mark Merson, and your mom's taken her car to Kara Merson. That's the way that it's worked for the Mersons over the years, and people keep coming back because the Mersons operate with honesty and integrity. And you want to find that in anybody you do business with, but particularly in that industry, it's pretty easy to get taken for a ride. The Mersons won't do it. They do it right. Check them out at mersonauto.com. Visit them on Saint Jacques, just west of Cavendish. As Andrew Carter used to like to say, tell them Terry and Ted sent you and get a free blank stare.
That was across the street from the Rose Bowl Lanes.
That's right, yeah.
And down the street from the Bon Voyage Tavern, where many of us from Loyola.
Was that little brick building? That's right. I remember that, the Bon Voyage.
Well, many of us grew up on Friday nights and would have our beer, too much beer usually.
Yes.
On our way to dinner at the Chalet Barbecue.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is still there.
Which is that's the perfect complement to too much beer.
Yeah.
Dinner,
Yes.
the chicken at Chalet
There's some
Barbecue.
West End institutions for you, eh?
No kidding.
And my daughter, my 31-year-old daughter Grace, says to me, "Dad, what's the phone number at Chalet Barbecue?" And I say 489-7235. And it still is.
Yeah. This is something we were talking about earlier today at lunch. God, the city has changed, Ian, and it's I don't want to be the grandpa on the swing, but I don't know if it's for the better. There was an electricity and a magic and a vibrancy and a almost like a New York vibe, to the city in the 70s and the 80s, and I think even into the 90s. Is it just evolution where we're at?
Or are we just going to the wrong neighborhoods now?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure of the answer. I think part of it is that the welcome mat in Montreal and Quebec isn't quite what it used to be. And I don't want to get into the Bill 96, Bill 21 discussion. That's too complicated.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about it. I think it's going to do as much damage as it did back in 1977. But go ahead.
If you, I don't disagree with you on that. If you're, you have a labor shortage, but you're not encouraging immigrants to come here, then people with job skills will take them somewhere else. Just that simple.
Yeah, because there's a thing in the book where you describe meeting Mr. Mulroney at PVM, and there was a buzz back then. The Alcan head office was there,
Sure.
the RBC head office was there, and there was people coming and going and horns blowing and people hailing cabs and neon signs, and there was I don't know, there was a vibrancy to the city that I just don't, I don't get from the giant circle or the Bixie bikes.
The yellow things outside the airport that we saw.
The pretend flags, whatever the fuck those things are. I don't know. They're just, I don't know if it's an age thing, if it's a perspective thing or whatever it is, but it doesn't have its pizzazz that it once had.
Well, you could ask Premier Legault ask him when he was in the airline business, when he went to New York and Toronto, what language did he speak
Yeah, yeah.
to get landing rights for his aircraft?
The book is called Politics and Players. Ian MacDonald. What a just an unbelievably wonderful read it is for a summer day.
At better bookstores everywhere.
At better bookstores
From
everywhere.
McGill Queen's University Press. There's a shameless plug.
Nice.
Sorry about that.
And if you know what, if you love the country like I love the country, and you have a love of history of the country like I do, these stories are fascinating. And as I've said during the podcast, Ian sat at the foot of power, or next to the people who were in positions of power, and has a great perspective on things like Mr. Mulroney and Mr. Turner. There was a couple of times where I teared up. I got a little bit emotional, but Ted and I were saying as we get older, we cry more.
Right. Drop of a hat.
And there's a great picture of Ian on the front cover in front of Westmount Square. I recognize that right away.
Taken by my other daughter, Grace.
That's right. Yeah. And a nice picture, as we said, on the dock of the cottage with his other daughter on the back cover. Ian, thank you for doing this. This was really, really fascinating, and a lot of great stories, and it was great to see you.
Anytime.
Okay.
Standing By, the Terry and Ted podcast, is sponsored by Jaguar Land Rover Laval, where the luxury is unmistakably British. But nobody wears a top hat or a monocle